This Quoircast Podcast episode is brought to you by Apostates Anonymous, the show you turn to when you're no longer an evangelical, or even a Christian. Join hosts Matthew J. DiStefano and Keith Giles as they tip over just about every sacred cow known to man. You're sure to have a good time if you're a heathen or heretic or apostate or reprobate. If you're an evangelical, maybe you won't have such a good time. But either way, we want you to listen. You can check out Apostates Anonymous wherever you get your podcast fix. Now, on to the show.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
All right. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Matthew McConaughey. I am here in the studio with my brother John. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
All right. I should give you, if I get to be Matthew McConaughey, you should get to be somebody cool too. Maybe you want to be like John Cusack or something? Or if you could be somebody, who would you be?
Back in the day, before I had the hair and the beard, I got told a lot that I looked like Steve Buscemi.
That's a hell of a compliment. Okay, let's try this again. I'm Matthew McConaughey. I'm joined in the studio with my good friend Steve Buscemi, the bug-eyed
wonder himself. Why do I have to be Mr. Pink? Why do I have to be Mr. Pink? Why can't I be Mr. Purple?
I don't know, man. It's the luck of the draw. I'm Mr. Brown. I wasn't even in that movie. What am I talking about? Anyway, we've already meandered too far from the actual point here. I am not Matthew McConaughey, even though I've been told I sound like him. So there you go. Nat Turney, my brother John, is here with me, and we are here on this podcast we call This Is Not Church, because quite frankly, if it were, you'd have left by now. Don't you think? Yeah. Or maybe some of you would have been like, hell yes, finally, something interesting at church. I don't know. But regardless, this is our little podcast. And we have an awesome guest today. And her name is Kate Ott. I'm going to read you a tiny bit about her, and then I'm going to let her speak for herself because she has plenty to say. And we can't wait to get started. So Kate Ott is a Jerre L. and Mary Joy Stead Professor of Christian Social Ethics and Director of the Stead Center for Ethics and Values at the Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary. That is a mouthful that I probably butchered like 15 different ways. She's also the author of Christian Ethics for a Digital Society and Sex and Faith, Talking with Your Children from Birth. I am sure there's a whole lot more. That's one of the shorter bios I've read. First of all, awesome. Brevity is the soul of wit, we have been told. So that's great. But I'm sure that means there's lots that we've left off the table. So let's just jump in. Welcome to the podcast. Kate, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Yeah, I feel very accomplished because now I have a title that's like longer than anything else I've ever done in life.
Yeah, I have a title too. It goes like this. I just said it, I think. I'm not even sure what would my title be, John?
I don't know. Purveyor of all that is bourbon.
Yes.
Oh, that's a good title.
Coffee roaster extraordinaire. Whiskey snob, I don't know, co-host of a weird podcast, all this other stuff. But that's great. So I don't know what any of those words meant that I read. The Jerre L. and Mary Joy Stead Professor of Christian Social Ethics. But you're at the Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary. I remember. Just in case y'all don't know this, because how would you know this? Why would you know this? We tried to record this once before, and we had just terrible technology on my end, and so. But part of our conversation offline had to do with this evangelical seminary that Kate is part of, and how some people hear the word evangelical and go, "Ooh, what is that?" And I thought you might maybe remind us what we talked about a little bit about Garrett-Evangelical Seminary.
Yes. Well, I'm one of those people, so it's strange that I find myself here. No, actually, so the Garrett grew out of the Chicago Training School, which was founded by this super amazing deaconess in the Methodist Church who wanted to help people, women mostly, to become school teachers, trainers, just like this amazing background I never knew. And it merged with another seminary, I believe a little bit north. This could be total myth. Sorry. I know it merged with a seminary. I just don't know from where. And that's how the two names came together, Garrett and Evangelical. And they kept Theological and Seminary. So we have a very long name. But yeah, we're not actually in the, what stereotypes might be of the evangelical tradition. We are of the left-leaning Methodists who are struggling with what's happening with the United Methodist Church around sexuality issues. And I myself, I grew up Roman Catholic in the Midwest. And then I went to seminary and lost all things.
As typically happens, right?
Yes. So I became the ecumenical Christian that I believe all seminaries turn us into.
Yes. What a tragedy that is. That we turn people, take people from, staunchly, lodged in their denominations and make them ecumenical. What a horrifying thought. When I was in junior high, I think it was, my junior high youth pastor always referred to seminary as cemetery because, that's clever because that's where your faith goes to die. So he thoroughly discouraged any of us from attending seminary. But he was very, very happy to push us into Bible colleges that were run by the denomination so we could be further indoctrinated into all of that stuff. I was in my 30s before I even knew what the word ecumenical existed, let alone what it meant. And then I found out in my naivete, I was like, man, what a cool thing to be ecumenical. And then I found out in some circles that is absolutely not meant in a positive way. It's absolutely pejorative. And so kudos to you for holding on to your ecumenicity.
Ecumenism?
Ecumenicalism? I don't even know, but
I also usually say, oh, I'm Catholic, but I write it with a small c, like Nicene Creed, Universal. No one knows the difference because I'm just saying the word.
Yeah. But that was one of the things that, it's strange because I mentioned in my 30s, I went on a Methodist retreat called the Walk to Emmaus, which you may or may not be familiar with. You're shaking your head, yes, so you know what I'm talking about. And so this is...
mostly from the Bible, but I do know that the Methodists do it well.
Right. Well, yeah, it was also in the Bible, but just, yada, yada Bible. But but I got on this I had gone on this spiritual retreat. And I only tell this story sometimes to emphasize the absolutely insular bubble I lived in as an evangelical, because I had never to that point even, I think I'd heard the creed, the Apostles' Creed once or twice, but I'd never been in a service where it was recited. And so we went through this, the Methodist version still uses the word Catholic. I believe in the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, forgiveness of sins. And I was like, whoa. Back up. Hold the goddamn phone. I'm not a Catholic. And so I had this very, very nice pastor who was on that thing, who kind of took me aside and was like, I noticed you kind of made a face at the word Catholic, little c Catholic, universal Christian church versus, Roman Catholicism. I'm like, okay, I guess. But I got my eye on you, man. You're trying to rope-a-dope me into some sort of papist society where I'm going to, start, doing Hail Marys or some stuff, man. But it was such a weird world to come from because now that I look back, it seems so odd that we were so anti-Catholic. Actually, it wasn't just anti-Catholic. We were anti-anything other than who we were. And very much taught that we had cornered the market, cornered the market on truth. But anyway. It was an interesting thing. So yeah, little c Catholic.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I don't think we were, I say this very naively. I don't think we were anti other religions, but also growing up Catholic, in sort of immigrant communities in the Midwest, I didn't know anybody wasn't Catholic until 6th grade when we played this, our Savior Lutheran Church in basketball. And I was like, I haven't heard of that before.
Yeah,
my friend was like,
Lutherans.
Yeah, they're a Lutheran. And I was like, oh, what saint is that?
That is awesome. Saint Luther.
I'm sure some people are down with that.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it was not the brightest question to ask at the moment. And that was my entrance into other denominations.
Which saint is that? That's okay. We were so weird in our denominations that we sent missionaries to predominantly Catholic countries to save them. So you realize that 90% of this country is Christian. Yeah, but they're not the right kind of Christian. So we have to send missionaries to Mexico because, they're all going to hell because they're the wrong kinds of Christians. So that's the upbringing that John and I both had. Okay. But we digress. So let's talk about issues of faith, and I guess based on the title of your book, we're gonna broach the taboo subject of sex. It's actually fitting that we're recording this late at night. I feel like turning the lights down and lighting a candle and be like, "Don't take a bomb. We're going to talk about sex and faith."
What was the guy from SNL? You have the nice cavatier.
I have my cavatier. You have you got a cup of something there. It looks like it might be Crevassier. So yeah, let's talk about that. Talk to us about the book. What's that all about? You love my probing questions. These are.
What's the book about?
I went to the Chris Farley School of Interviewing, which is always like questions like, so what's that about?
Well, first of all, you should probably say the name of the title of the book.
I was getting. That's why I have my phone out so I can look at it. It is Christian Ethics for a Digital Society. Plus, there was another book called Sex and Faith Talking.
This is the newest
Those are the other books.
Or is that the subtitle of the first book? See how prepared I am, John?
Those are two other books. So
okay, I don't even know what I'm talking about. John, why don't you just take this over? Because clearly I'm still high on allergy medication and ignorance. So go for it.
I will read the name of the title of the book, and then we can move on from there. So the book is called...
that you're so young, you couldn't have written 3 books by now. Come on, man.
It's called
fair.
Sex, Tech, and Faith, Ethics for a Digital Age. And all I know is this is the question that was asked off before we started recording was, have you got to the sex robots yet?
Oh my gosh, I forgot about the sex robots.
So at some point, we're going to have to talk about sex robots.
I mean, we got to get to chapter 5 at some point.
Yes.
Should we wade into that and start somewhere a little less crazy first? We'll start with
one of the things, because when we talked the other day prior to us trying to record, one of the topics or one of the scenarios that I mentioned was that I felt like in the beginning of the book, you were being kind of more just factual, right? You were just kind of laying out facts, and you weren't really giving us. There were subtle opinions, there were subtle tones of which side you would be on when it comes to like maybe political views of some of this. But for the most part, you were being very unbiased, I guess is the best I can say. And so I was a little concerned because there was some stuff in here that I was like, which side is she going to go? Was that kind of on purpose, at least in the introduction of the book?
Yeah. I mean, in the intro, what I really want to try to do is set up for the reader that by reading this book, I assume along the way you're going to be an ethicist too, or you already are. Like if you have beliefs of any kind, you do ethics. You think about what's right and wrong, what should or shouldn't be in the world, who you should or shouldn't be, what community should or shouldn't be. And so I want to lay out for you, this is how we do it. Like, I often say to the students when they come into my ethics class, like, just imagine that like we have a computer in front of us. We're going to spend the first part of the semester taking that computer apart. So it's descriptive. And then I want you to think about how should it be put back together? Like what's the best way to do that? So that's kind of how I start all my writing. And the way in which I want the reader to engage the book. So you come in and you think about how have we thought about sexual ethics? In what ways were we taught about it? What are some new ways to think about it? So I talk about the way in which, we've often been given a sexual ethic that's really behavior-based, right? Like, here's your list. Here's like 2 of them that are good and the rest are bad. Maybe one that's good and the rest are bad. And then there's relationship ethic where we're like, okay, as long as you have this relationship, we're not really going to question what you do. But everything else, like, just don't do that stuff or don't be in those relationships. And then there's the third way to do sexual ethics. This is, of course, like super, 101 sexual ethics is value-based, right? Where we say, no, actually, Paul in Corinthians talking about what love is and what it isn't. He was talking to a community. And honestly, our sexual ethics are as political as they are individual. That, if we lived into those values for what we want in our relationships, that would be a much higher standard than a list of behaviors or a specific kind of relationship you would get in. So I lay that out for the reader. I don't immediately say, hey, it's all about value-based ethics until we get into the specific kinds of sex tech examples. And then I push the reader to think about what would it mean if you applied those values to how you think about engaging this kind of technology.
Wow. Okay. I like that you said that we're all ethicists on some level, right? I think that's so true. But are you troubled, as I am, about how little consideration mainstream Christianity gives to ethics? Or does it make sense to you? I mean, I don't hear mainstream Christians talking about ethics very often. It's always about sort of vague notions of morality. It's all about, like you said, it's all about behavior and prohibition and, sort of, but when it comes to larger questions of just overall of a Christian ethic, that gets problematic for evangelicals, I think, because I think they'd find out if they really dug into some of those Christian ethics, they would find themselves falling short very, very often. Even though they might consider themselves to be moral, they're not necessarily ethical. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, in the sense that I think, most of us are kind of lazy ethicists. We're like, I can make that decision today. It'll work out. And also, if we scrutinized every decision, it might be somewhat, disabling to living in everyday life, given the kind of quandaries that we face.
Sure.
What I think is lacking most in our conversations in terms of ethics, so I think of morality as like the everyday stuff we do without thinking. It's kind of our behaviors in action, but also, the kind of through line of how we think about integrity, community. Ethics is like, I step back from that and I reflect on it, right? It's that moment where I'm like, that didn't go right. Or, hey, I heard that today and it doesn't quite sit right. And that's where I think we're lazy ethicists. I think we're much more comfortable with a faith leader or a faith community saying, yeah, you're good. Just do these 3 things, right? And you don't have to think about it. Don't think too hard about the difficult decisions. So like, get married, get heterosexually married. That's even better. Like that really fits our ethic for a long time. And then, don't worry about all that other stuff. All those troubles you have, all those questions you have about why my sexuality isn't flourishing in this relationship. You told me that was like the penultimate relationship. Or like, why do I find other things sexually interesting? How do I talk to someone about that? Do I even know how my body works? So I think we get lazy and give a couple of quick, here's how you can be a good moral person in the world. And then we stop doing the ethical reflection on that.
Well, then to what degree do you think, because John and I grew up in, as we've mentioned a bunch of times, in evangelical Christian churches. And so for us, a sexual ethic was purity culture. That was it. There was no, larger discussion about healthy relationships, healthy sexuality, a healthy sexual ethic. It was always, pretty much, this is sex. This is where it's good, and everywhere else it's bad. And so I think in a lot of ways really stunted our growth in that area, because it was. I think being kind, I would say they were trying to take a complex issue and try to give us a fairly simple way to navigate it. But I don't think that was what the end result ended up being. I think it ended up being just this diluted sense of behavior modification. But so to what degree do you think has like that purity culture kind of inculcated us against flourishing sexually? Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. And I think there are ways in which, so I think it works differently depending on your gender and your sexual orientation, like the kind of messages you got with regard to that. And I think the first way is that it reduces sexuality to a behavior and a behavior to avoid until you get to some like magical ring. And then suddenly all the shame, all the confusion is going to go away, which we know doesn't happen. There's plenty of other books and writing about the problems after that. But part of what I'm also trying to do in this book is to help people understand that sexuality is so much more than behaviors. It's our sensuality, intimacy, sexual and reproductive health. Yes, it includes behaviors, but it's also gender identity, sexual orientation. It's like this complex mess of things, and none of us is exactly the same as someone else. So that's the other thing that I think purity culture does. It it has sort of a divide and conquer mentality, right? Like, we're going to create this gender binary, whether everybody fits in it or not. We're going to create this orientation binary, whether everyone fits in it or not. Again, I think you're right. Like, folks are trying to simplify things. I think in their minds, they're trying to keep young people safe. I think both the data backs me up on this in terms of sex ed research, but also just lived experience, that doesn't serve people well. Actually having information. It's not like, we're not like, hey, don't study history because you'll be a bad citizen. I mean, I guess now we are.
Because we no longer study history. Okay,
that's a bad analogy. We're not like, hey, don't study math because you can't be a good engineer. We're like, no, actually, you need to know the basics of this so you can actually be good at this at some point in your life. You can run a home budget and do all these things. But when it comes to sex and sexuality, we're like, just no information and it's going to be glorious.
I'm sorry, that just struck me as really funny. It's like, listen, I need you to go out and I need you to fix this piece of equipment. I need you to work on this difficult math problem, but I'm not going to give you any of the actual tools you need to accomplish it. But don't worry, it'll be great. Oh my God, that's perfect. That's perfect. That's exactly what I was told. It's like, I'm going to get married and on, my wedding night, everything's just going to make sense. Don't worry. It's going to be fine. Ask my wife. It wasn't. No, I'm just kidding. But we have treated this. There's so much shame around this topic. And it still baffles me because even now I'm borderline blushing talking about it. I'm 51 fucking years old, and I'm still going, I'm whispering the word sex. Like, it's backwards, isn't it? I mean, and we wonder why there's so much sexual dysfunction, why there's so much angst in people's lives surrounding their sexuality. Something you said earlier really struck me, and I don't want to let it go. One thing the purity culture, I think what you were saying, did for us was very, very much try to create binary definitions of things, right? That was bad enough for John and I who fit into those binary definitions. And I still feel like we suffered some backlash from that. And I can't imagine, though, how the people in my youth group and the people who I knew who were not binary in that nature, who were then trying desperately to stuff themselves into a mold that would make them acceptable, what kind of inner turmoil and angst that must have created in them. Man, that had to have been a number, wouldn't you think, psychologically, spiritually, just trying to make people to conform to something that they couldn't possibly do, right?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. But I also think, this is why I love adolescence. Teenagers are just amazing humans. I think they navigate the craziness of our world, both in a way that's a little protected, but also in a way that I'm allowed to swear on this, right?
Absolutely. I've done it 7 times. I don't know. I'm good. Yes. Okay. Please do.
That they're just like, fuck you. The system you created doesn't work for me.
Exactly.
So I'm going to figure it out on my own. So I have colleagues now who, young woman didn't really know, cisgender female identified, didn't know she was lesbian, but thought purity culture was awesome. She's like, I don't know why you guys are all having this problem. I don't feel like I want to kiss him. I'm perfectly fine with holding hands. But it wasn't
of course you are.
It was because I'm not actually attracted to men. But in that, yeah. I have this amazing grad student. She just finished her PhD, Lauren Sawyer. She wrote her whole dissertation on the way in which LGBTQIA folks and women in purity culture, young girls, how they actually find these moments of agency by using the gender and orientation binaries to find this freedom. That it just seems, it's not for everyone. It does a ton of harm. But I think there are these little gaps that it's never all or nothing. And anyway, that's what I love about sexual ethics. And it's what I absolutely love about adolescents, that as many times as we try to screw them up, they find ways to freedom, to understanding themselves beside us.
Sure.
I see that. I definitely see that more with the younger generations around us now. Nat and I being 52, 51 years old. There was a lot of stuff ingrained into us, right, that we weren't specifically from adults in our life. And then the church also that, questions were not accepted. Just sit down, be quiet. Don't question what we're asking or telling you to do. So the shocker part for me, specifically with our age group, is really the only criteria for our youth group leaders was that if they could get a married couple, right? So they had a man and a woman to be there to help us through all these questions. But that was it. That's all the training they had. They weren't ready, capable, able to even remotely come up with some kind of response to any of the questions when it comes to sexuality, specifically if it's outside of what we consider this is in quotes for people who don't see the video, the norm, right? They're not prepared. They're barely prepared to sit down and talk to us about what they consider is the okay thing to do, which is abstinence until you're married. And they barely can handle that, let alone anybody questioning their sexuality, their gender, any of that. And I mean, but these are the people we put in charge of our kids at Sunday school and youth group, and they're not prepared to help with these questions at all.
Well, they're not prepared to help with them, and they're equipped with all the ways to quote scripture at them to tell them that they're wrong, or
cherry pick scripture to make it sound like what the church says is the right way, even though we could talk about all that for days, right? About how these cherry pick scriptures are not necessarily saying what they think they say, right? It's like from Princess Bride. I don't think that word means what you think it means, right?
Yes.
I do want to say though, I think I'm remembering this correctly. I think I started the intro off with like really specifically saying like, I mean, I love my, liberal, predominantly white, all LGBTQIA plus churches out there, but they're also not teaching about sexuality, right? Like they have a flag, they're advocating. Yeah, they're maybe out on the political end of things, but they're not as a whole. Some are, but as a whole, they are not educating young people about sexuality issues. They're definitely not talking with adults about it. The evangelical tradition, it's cornered a market on things I don't think are healthy, but at least it's talking about it. And maybe that's at least some model to say, it's okay to talk about this. Let's broaden how we talk about it. Let's change our record on who we're supporting and how we understand issues of sexuality. Again, more broadly, not that very narrow definition of sexuality. But I mean, that's really why I wrote this text, because I go to faith communities regularly, granted across the North American region. And, I'm the person who talk to the youth, talk to the parents about how to talk about sexuality with your faith values combined. And they all started asking me questions about digital technology. I think I wisely thought, okay, well, probably the book about sex robots for teenagers isn't going to sell that well. So
I think you'd be surprised.
I mean, it might.
I mean, they might come away like thinking that's not what they thought it was going to be. But who's not going to buy a book about sex robots? I buy one.
It's definitely for adults. And I have to say, I have had more conversations about this book with friends or just random people, like at a party, than anything else I've ever written. And it's because people use sex tech. They just don't know how to talk about it with everyone else. And honestly, that's my biggest ethical issue with technology, is that sex tech is further privatizing how we think about our experiences of sexuality, where we experience our sexuality. And I really think the value of Christianity is that community is supposed to be part of how we understand sexuality if it happens in a healthy way.
Okay. So this, for lack of a better word, I mean, the advancements in technology, I guess, in some ways, and we're not just talking about sex robots. Obviously, we're talking about online dating apps, and we're talking about, all the ways in which we access certain parts of that. That is the assertion then that on some level, we've created even another layer of anonymity right? Where we can experience these things privately and then further insulate ourselves against the community that's supposed to be part of how we express this, right?
Yeah. Like, I mean, you don't even have to go to an actual store to buy pornography anymore.
Thank God
right?
for that. I got so tired of wearing disguises. Jesus, it was exhausting. Having to come up with fake names. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, you're right. I joke with kids these days that like, you have no idea how hard John and I worked to get porn when we were kids. I mean, it was a Herculean sort of Tolkien sort of, quest to find like really softcore porn. And now these guys have, at their fingertips, they've got, oh my God, galaxies of just crazy stuff. So they're lazy and they're spoiled when it comes to their porn.
Indeed. And it's private.
And it's private. Yeah. I mean, shoot, if it's not private enough, you can get a VPN and make it even more private. These kids are really savvy, by the way. I taught high school for about 7 or 8 years. And let me tell you one thing. There is nothing as crafty or ingenious in the world as a teenage boy who wants to get around network blocks to find his way onto something he shouldn't find. I used to joke with them that if they would apply even a 10th of their brain power to actual schoolwork as they did trying to get around all of the privacy things we had, they would all be straight A students because they were unstoppable when it came to that stuff. But yeah, so all those things that like you said, you don't have to. There are layers and layers of anonymity that can be accessed now that just kind of keeps you further and further away. But is this not just what, on some levels, Christian culture has created, right? Because of the prohibition, because of the shame, because of all the other stuff that we've sort of heaped on this. Gosh, why wouldn't we want to have more anonymity? I mean, we've never been encouraged to express any of this openly anyway. So yes, more anonymity. And I think that's generally true among Christian communities. On the flip side of that, right, we do have evangelical Christian communities who are attempting to enforce surveillance technology on individuals who are using online pornography in order to monitor them. So I just want to say, any use of surveillance software that's going to send what sites you visit to a group of people is just expanding the network of people who is looking at online pornography. That I've got to say, I mean, what I really want in that chapter in particular is I want us to think about what kind of online sexually explicit material is useful to us. What kind of online sexually explicit material is empowering, helps in our relationships, like helps me explore my gender identity, sexual orientation, my relationship. There is all kinds of material out there that does that. And then there is this whole set of free, quick, accessible material that is sexist, racist, homophobic, problematic. Like, it doesn't need to exist. And yet, because it's quick, accessible, free, private, it's continuing to get use. And honestly, those church surveillance softwares, they're just bolstering the hits on that material from my perspective. Yeah.
I don't actual data to back that up. Though there was a really good Wired article on this. So I think there is actual data that backs it up.
I was going to say, I think someone has done the data on that. And I think you're probably right. If you're out there and you've done the data, let us know. If you've done the research, I think you make a fair point. And I think it'd be interesting to back that up with some data. But I think you're right.
Right. Like, why not spend our time? Why not get rid of the surveillance software? Why not spend our time helping people become ethicists? Say, like, what do you gain from looking at this? What helps you about yourself in your relationship? Because what we know about online pornography use is that there's a very small subset of mostly like young adult to middle-aged cisgender men who have problems with use. I don't, there's debates on whether it's addiction or not, but they definitely have compulsive behaviors around it.
Sure.
And those are exacerbated by all the other things going on in their lives. It's not caused by it. It's exacerbated by it. And yet, like, that's the thing our churches are focusing on instead of, for example, the young I don't know, the young trans kid who's just looking for someone else who looks like them and is expressing themselves sexually in a relationship so they can learn something about what that might look like in the world as they understand themselves. Or, young women who are only in, maybe abusive or semi-abusive using kinds of relationships and don't even know what it is to experience their own sexuality. And then they find this online kind of sexually explicit material that empowers them. I think there's really educational uses for that. And to me, that's supported by our Christian understandings of who we are as sexual people from birth till death, created that way and made to experience pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah. Like in some of the studying I've done specifically with, within the LGBTQIA plus communities, is that because the community around them is so quiet and so it's the topic is so off-putting that they are having to go out and find people. Now you can find this online, but in the past it was actually literally going places and finding people who are willing to come have some kind of relationship, which they had no clue what kind of relationship they were looking for, right? I mean, God forbid. I mean, heterosexual relationships are already hard enough, and it's talked about and seen on TV. It's in books. It's everywhere, right? It's pervasive. And my relationship, as I'm maturing and becoming an adult, is fucking hard already. Let alone having to put the taboo of I don't know if I'm male or female. I don't know. I'm non-binary. I'm a man who likes men, and there's nothing there. We're getting better at it. The communities are getting better. The church isn't. The church is not at all. But I mean, it's just so frustrating to read these, book after book of biographies of people who were coming up in the church who had no access to anything that let them know how to be who they are. And so, yes. And so a lot of them would turn to porn and would turn to that kind of stuff because that's the only access they had to the feelings they had inside about who they were. And so how do we even bring that to the forefront and say, hey, this is a conversation we need to have openly and honestly with our LGBTQIA plus siblings and say, this is a safe place for you to have these conversations. How do we even start that conversation? Or can we?
I mean, I usually start that conversation with just, again, that understanding that sexuality is so much more diverse, affective, emotional than a focus on a behavior.
Yeah,
because that
sure.
also then finds common ground. It's not like, okay, because like I'm a cis, white, heterosexual woman, like my sexuality is figured out. That's not true. It's expansive. It changes over time. That's the other thing. I think we also think like, there's like this gap of a couple of years of puberty and then somehow our bodies don't change after that, which is a total lie.
True.
So I do think that starting with that broader definition of sexuality invites everyone into the conversation, but it also helps us understand that when we are talking about these kinds of issues, yes, there are social structures, there are, church doctrines, there are ways in which certain individuals are oppressed by the way in which we configure our society and our relationships in churches around sexuality. So we need to open that up. But I also, I don't think starting the conversation from a place of like, we just want to, create this space to help X group. I don't think that's also going to work because then it leaves all of us kind of out of the conversation and reinforces that like there's a certain way to be sexual and we're going to expand that definition. I want to throw the whole thing out and say we got it wrong from the start. And instead, what we need to do is understand that, like when we look at Jesus also has a sexuality. And we can really see that through intimacy, through sensuality, through his developmental growth from a child into, an adult human. we don't have to see specific sexual behaviors. I mean, we could go with kissing and hugging and everything else. Well, we've got documented. Maybe we could bring in, the Gospel of Mary. But we've got stuff there. And I don't know why we don't talk about it. So in the book, I'm also trying to push us to think of Song of Songs. Why do we always leave that out?
Yeah, for sure.
The body of Christ as this interface, around VR where it doesn't always have to end at my skin, but I can have these experiences that kind of go beyond my skin into virtual reality. Yeah.
And so that brings into question. So the larger question of sexual ethics, then, I think you've made an excellent point here, that when we narrow sexuality to one specific thing, then we've necessarily narrowed the conversation, right? To one specific thing. And so, this whole idea of a sexual ethic then having to do with intimacy and relational ethics and power dynamics and agency within relationships and all of these things for me, I'm just now starting to understand, or at least to consider. It broadens that all out, doesn't it? And removes it from this place of, I keep go back to the word shame, but I haven't come up with a better one yet, but of embarrassment maybe. Okay, well, we're not just talking about that one thing you don't want to talk about, but within this whole realm of sexual ethic is all of this other stuff that is absolutely germane to the conversation. It touches every part of our lives, right? This isn't just isolated to one, we don't just close the bedroom door and it all stays there, right? So very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think people get a little freaked out when the idea of sexual ethics expands beyond behaviors. The idea that I'm a sexual person in everything that I do. And I think culturally we have a problem with the idea that that's true. And I also am not looking for sex everywhere. Right? I think we've somehow conflated the two of those instead of when I show up, right? When I show up here to talk to you, I'm a sexual person. When I show up to teach my students, I'm a sexual person. And if I'm not aware of that, if I'm not aware of the history, the attitudes, the values that go into making me who I am, I can easily cross boundaries. I can overstep in that way. So I think the kinds of theologies we have that are well, it's just a behavior. So, the pastor who does all this creepy stuff, that's not wrong. Come on. Right. We know it's wrong. We feel intuitively it's wrong. We just don't have a way to hold them accountable because we don't have an ethic that says that person's a sexual person all the time. And they need to know how to live in positive, healthy boundaries with regard to that.
Well, and isn't that where you do get these situations where people kind of cross the line, right? And go too far because specifically within, I can't speak of other countries because I live here, but within America, specifically within the Christian evangelical fundamentalism base, white heterosexual men get away with pretty much everything that they do. And so to acknowledge that and try to become a better version of that person, right? So acknowledging that, yes, I live in a society that kind of gives me an out when I overstep the bounds. I say things that are not appropriate because, we've all been raised in this is boys being boys, right?
That's just locker room talk, John. Lighten up.
Right. And sadly, we elected a president who literally, like Nat just said, that's what the response from some of my strongest Christian friends was. That's just locker room talk.
That's just how guys talk.
That's just how guys talk. That's nothing to do with who they are. It's everything to do with who they are as a person. And everything.
John, I've known you my whole life. I have never once heard you talk like that. So guys don't talk like that.
Well, not all guys do, but I'm not saying, if I was to talk about...
I don't think most guys do. I think that guy does. And he's an asshole. But yeah, but you're right.
Just to clarify, me 30 years ago probably said some things I didn't think were inappropriate because I was raised in a culture that said I can say these things and get away with it. Fast forward to me now, and I'm very hyper aware of the people around me who have no reason to trust me in who I am, the way I was raised. And it's our responsibility within people that we are to be intentional and open and honest and listen to the other people. And when they say, I'm uncomfortable with what so-and-so said, to take that as valid and true. That's the big step, right? And then, I don't want to like stand on a soapbox for too long, but it is like, it's something we need to, it's a stereotype we need to break. And it's something that we need to get, we're not going to get past it. I don't see us getting past it until it's completely broken down. Like you said, till we tear this thing down to the even below the foundation and rebuild something where these kind of conversations can happen. But within, as we're moving into technology and we're having all this new, how do we talk about things like Tinder? How do we talk about things like Grindr? How do we talk about things like that without feeling like, oh, I'm embarrassed. I don't want to talk about this because I'm super uncomfortable. I don't know how to talk about this with this. I just had a conversation with 2 of my employees talking about how they met somebody on Tinder. And I'm like, I don't even know what I should say.
Yeah, I'm judging all of you right now.
Right.
So.
Well, like in the back of my mind, I'm like, anything that has to do with like dating, online dating is just like, it's just weird, right? For people of my generation, it's not weird for them at all. Of the new, the generations that have come after us, it's part of their life. So how do we even start a conversation where they know I'm okay hearing what you're saying without doing that weird face that I just saw that no one's going to see because we don't have video. But
you did make a weird face though.
I did.
I was like, ooh, ugh. Yeah. That was a I'm really uncomfortable right now face. But
how do we even step into that and have open and honest conversations with some of the younger generations? But this doesn't bother them at all. This is part of their life.
Yeah. Well, I want to jump on the soapbox with you for a moment and say I would love to change the boys will be boys to boys will be held accountable for what they do and say.
Yes.
And if we could live in that world, I would love to live in that world. And there are definitely people who do, and we are moving to that in many communities, but it is definitely not universal, and it's not even, part of our legal system. So we have work to do there. On the question, so I think the other piece, going back to what you said about like the book kind of starts out with a neutrality, and there are ways in which there are moments where it's uncomfortable. One of the things I really want the readers to do is up their sexual literacy and up their digital literacy. So what I love to do, I've been married for 20 plus years and I've never been online dating before. I mean, I've done a lot of research, but I really want my partner to go online and we want to see if we actually get matched. See if it works out.
I'm not so sure I want the answer to that question.
I want to test the algorithm. But one of the things I love to do in those conversations is sort of start from the place that I'm not as digitally literate as you are. Tell me how Tinder works. Why do you feel comfortable meeting someone this way? What kind of safeguards do you feel? What did it make you, what kind of bubble did it force you into of how to represent yourself? What do you expect when you actually meet the person in person versus what kind of profile pics they put up there? Those to me are the most fascinating conversations because you learn all the ways in which folks who have to be digitally immersed in this kind of the way in which, honestly, the data shows that more people meet online than they do in any other way now. So when you think, oh, that person, they met at a bar or they met at a party or friends introduced them, over 50% of them met online through these kind of apps.
Yeah.
And that's totally changed the way in which community participates in connecting people, which maybe for some of us is like really good. I mean, like the horrible blind dates your like friends have put you on, probably bad. Maybe Tinder has a better algorithm. But I think it's fascinating just to start with that conversation, so that I come in as someone who wants to learn about it and wants to learn, how do you make decisions based on the way that the tech is designed? And they're already doing that, but I often think they haven't had that conversation. So they're not doing like the second order reflection on why they make those decisions, how it functions that way. And that then starts the ethics conversation from my point of view, without being judgmental, right? Because they're actually the ones who are teaching you how the tech works based on their experience. And then you can start to ask questions about it. And that's where, for me, I'm always then putting my values in. So do you really trust what's been put there? Do you feel like that kind of like back and forth was mutual? So I'm just trying to layer in some of the values to help people think about the tech is designed in a particular way, how we understand sexuality is functioning in a particular way. But there's just all these cool ways we could think more richly about the process that's happening.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I've been married since I was 19. So I got married before there was an internet. I've never been on a blind date. I don't know. I was also brought up inside of a purity culture that even said dating was we called it divorce practice. So we weren't. Yeah, that's how it was. Like we didn't believe in dating.
I just want to say that's wrong.
Of course it's wrong. It's completely fucked up. Like every time you meet a girl, you date her, you break up with her, you're just practicing for your divorce someday. So we were very, you think I'm making this shit up? It was extreme. So I leaned into the ethic that I was given, which was, hey, you get married young, but my children are in their 20s, now, and my second daughter met her husband online, and it was this weird thing for her, because she was kind of frustrated with the small dating pool in our town, and so her sister actually set her up with a profile on some Christian dating site, which is funny because her husband's not a Christian, but anyway, he was trolling the Christian dating sites. And unbeknownst to her sister had created this profile. She starts getting these messages from. Anyway, but she met her husband that way. And he's a nice guy, and they're happy. And but that was a strange world for me to even. And I remember going through that process myself of starting from a place of, well, that's weird, to eventually coming to a place of, no, it's not. It's no weirder than meeting somebody in a bar. And I mean, you're telling me that every time you meet somebody in person, they tell you the truth about themselves? I mean, you have to navigate all of that stuff too. And so, yeah, to me, it was for her anyway. It was I think if she was here to talk about it, she would say it was a very safe way to get to know somebody without having to, fully invest in something, without having to take a whole bunch of risks. And when she did finally go to meet him, she took her mother with her. So, that was, it's not awkward or nothing. But she's like, you're going to come with me, right? Make sure he's not a total creep. Oh, my wife's like, oh, absolutely. I'll kill him. So don't worry about that. But I think it's interesting because, just like anything else, we evolve into these understandings, right? We move past our initial stages of awkwardness or of thinking that it's weird to a place where I think you're right. I think another, even now for people who are 30 years old and younger, the question of online dating is probably not even a question. It's just a matter of to what degree are they involved in it rather than would they ever. So if the church is going to be have any hope of being relevant, they've got to come to terms with this, right? And not just by creating more Christian dating sites, but by also talking about it openly and stop telling people not to date because that's weird.
Well, and also on the technology side, I mean, haven't we seen time and time again, the church is always like the last to kind of catch up with new technology because
unless there's something in it for them.
Right. For the most part, it's the first response is it's probably evil.
Of course.
Some version of Satanism or it's going to lead you.
That's how the devil gets you, John.
It's going to lead you astray from the Christian ethic. that they have built, right? And it's usually quite a few years later that they start letting some of this merge into their community. And to the point where I would question anytime a church tells me something specifically within technology is evil and wrong, that they're probably wrong. That it's a knee-jerk reaction to something that they don't understand, right? And so
it goes all the way back to Galileo. I mean, what do you mean the earth revolves around the sun? Heretic! Burn up at the stake.
Though it is interesting that like evangelical movements were the first to adopt radio. I mean, as long as it leads to evangelism, they're all in on tech.
That's what I'm saying. You're right. That's what I'm saying. Is if there's something in it, right? If there's a way they can co-opt that technology, then what I find interesting too, and I want to go back to this thing of say maybe sexual abuse or misconduct inside of the churches and the lack of accountability there. Is that, would you say, the direct result of not having an ethic when it comes to sexuality, except in behavior prohibition? So they don't ever, what I mean to say is that it doesn't seem like they oftentimes tie that person's misconduct to an ethical dilemma. They race to find out ways they can then prevent that behavior from happening again. So the restoration process for that pastor who falls, is suddenly, all kinds of accountability, all kinds of safeguards around him or her to make sure that they don't have access to the kinds of materials that would produce this kind of behavior. And they never seem to want to actually address any of the ethical concerns. They just want to find a way to curtail the behavior. Do you think I think I've seen that over and over again.
Certainly. I want to say that the churches who do move quickly to try to curtail the behavior, I want to say thank you, because there are a lot that don't do that at all.
For sure.
So they just move them to a new church. So that's a good thing. Let's at least do that. I want to say, I think the fact that the predominant sexual ethic is so gendered and patriarchal.
Yeah,
the
for sure.
idea that there's no way, that this male pastor could have willingly abused someone, like he's been led astray because of these gender issues, or he's disordered, let's say it's male abuse or young male abuse, right? Like he's disordered in his desires. Like there's all these apologetics for the abuse and how it happens. And I think that's true online as well, right? Like I think online communities are very quick, and there's huge incel movements. There's all these movements that I talk about in the book of sort of like a patriarchal, heterosexist approach to thinking about online sexual abuse and the ways in which technologies can be exploited to go ahead and perpetuate that same kind of sexual ethic. I think until we rid ourselves of a sexual ethic that is deeply rooted in a gender binary, that's complementarity, that's the nice word for it, but is gender oppressive to women and anyone, identified that way, and serves as an apologetic in terms of how it understands sexual desire, that sexual desire is something we cannot control. I mean, thank you, Augustine.
Yeah, right. Thanks for that.
I don't know how he got so popular, but he was really clear with his problem. And yet we all took that as I don't know, we valorized the problem instead of being yeah, he's right. We should rethink that.
Yeah.
So I wonder what he would say today to most of us.
You're all going to hell. No.
He probably would. But I think he might also say you guys misunderstood me. I was trying to say this was an actual problem I needed to work on.
Yeah.
And shouldn't support that problem. We shouldn't apologize.
I feel like we'd get that response from a lot of people that we quote. I think Paul would say that an awful lot. Whoa, hey, y'all have missed the point. I'll tell you a story though, because you brought up the sort of patriarchal, by the way, nod to Beth Allison Barr, who told us that complementarianism is just patriarchy. Just nicely put. Thanks. And I don't think she coined that, but she did bring it up once or twice, and she's right. But I had a youth pastor when I was teaching high school in a private school who was arrested one night in his car with a 15-year-old young lady. And I'm telling you right now, the public story was shame, shame, terrible, terrible. In private, they blamed that girl for 99% of it. She was a predator. She was 15 and he was 32 or whatever he was. And she was somehow cast in the role of predator. She had seduced him. She had led him astray. And it was only the public outcry and the hugely public nature of the scandal that kept him from just being. I'm 99.9% sure if this had never come to light in that public of a way, that she would have been wished away to a different school. He would have been slapped on the wrist and told to be more careful in the future, and it would have been swept under the rug. But that seems to be, our default position, doesn't it? I mean, I see this as being part of rape culture. I see this as being part of all of the stuff that says, okay, on some level, I understand that what happened to you was wrong, but did you have to wear that when you went out?
Yeah.
Like, what did you think was going to happen? Well, I like what you said, that not the boys will be boys, but the boys will be held accountable, and that girls aren't responsible for, the behavior and actions and attitudes of other human beings. We've got to take ownership of that.
And that's the other issue on this is, not to continue talking about this, but to stop saying stuff like boys will be boys and absolutely call it for what it is. And it is rape culture. Anytime a person in power, specifically like in a youth group situation where they have power over a young girl or a young boy, what is happening is rape. It's not consensual. It's absolutely not. It's power dynamics. It's rape culture. And for any church to say anything other than that is just them trying to hide the problems they have in their church. And that's something else we just need to get past. Well, I don't mean past by like ignore it, but get past.
We just need to stop it, man.
Well, yeah, but
just stop it.
We need more people to be able to be willing to speak up. I mean, how many times have we seen in churches where parents have also been somehow browbeaten into going along with the story that the church says? We need more parents to stand up against these people in positions of power and saying, no, you're wrong. Everything you've done is wrong. You should be held accountable. You should go to jail, not be slapped on the wrist and move to another church where we can quietly let you continue to pastor. So yes, it's a patriarchy system specifically with white heterosexual men that this has all been built around.
So I want to throw a twist in this.
Okay.
Ooh, please do.
Yeah.
So I totally agree. And I think we need to change and disrupt this. I think this same conversation, so let's get to sex robots.
Okay.
Gets layered on.
You've stayed long enough. You now get sex robots. This is your reward for hanging on for almost an hour.
This conversation gets layered on to sex robots, right? Like, what's your stereotype of the person who? Let's start by saying the sex robots that like we're talking about don't exist yet. Should be clear about that, right? Like, what exists right now is a sex doll with a head on it that has a computer inside the head. The lips kind of move. It's kind of funky. Doesn't look real. It can generally carry on the same conversation that, Siri, Alexa, maybe OK Google can carry on. Okay? So, like, it's not an in-depth conversation, right?
They can give you directions. That would be helpful.
You're like, I said, turn the light on.
Will they mispronounce words like clitoris?
Yes, they will. Okay, so the world, like, Westworld does not exist, people.
Okay.
Let's just
Damn
be
it.
clear.
Okay, fine. Yet. I like that part.
Yet.
She's optimistic.
Well, it will, believe me.
It will be,
There
yeah.
are people motivated.
Right.
But our stereotype of like why someone wants a sex robot is definitely cisgender, generally white, heterosexual male, especially in the US, but definitely it changes demographically outside the United States very, very differently, especially in many of the Asian countries where there are like drastic demographic differences between numbers of females and males. But okay, right? Our stereotype is, my stereotype, I'll say when I first started writing this, is like the kind of geeky, antisocial. It'd be easier just to have this like Barbie doll than to interact with real women. So that, however, is not the case. The men who tend to have, so we have to kind of turn to like sex doll research instead of sex robots. The men who have sex dolls tend to, like, they have personalities, they have backstories, they have relationships with them. They are not antisocial outside of that relationship. They have jobs, they have friends. This is something that they have chosen. So that's the other thing I think that's important. If we think ethically about this question, am I engaging with this robot sexually because I think it's a person, it's a substitute for companionship or a robot or humanity? Or do I recognize it's a robot? It's something different. I want something different than what might be available in a human relationship. And I think that's a key difference to start to think about. If someone wants that because it is this different thing and they know it's different, I think that's a different ethical conversation than many people who assume like there's all these people, majority men, who like just want a robot that they're going to pretend is human, is a companion. And that the evidence isn't bearing that out.
And well, doesn't media and movies and all that, doesn't that portray exactly what you're talking about, what we expect it to be, the antisocial person, the person who doesn't really get along with anybody, never really fits in. Of course, then also they are somewhat psychotic, someone we should be afraid of, right? I mean, that's what we see within media. And it's interesting to see that is actually not the norm of what that would, people that would be interested in this kind of sex robot or sex toy or something like that is actually not that person.
Yeah. But I pose an interesting question, John, for you specifically.
Oh, okay.
What does the Bible say about this? Because clearly the Bible must address this somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure it does, yes.
Thou shalt not have sexual relations with a robot. There's your ethical problem. That not the ethical problem. I guarantee there's an unethical problem here, which is going to be for biblical literalists and people like that who are like, I don't know how to be against this. I don't know, what chapter and verse to cite to tell you that you're somehow being wrong. But
well, I think
it isn't. Go ahead, John.
I don't think it's that hard for them, really. If they are,
they're pretty
biblical literates. No, I'm saying I don't think it's that hard for them.
Yeah,
this is wrong. It's sex is something that happens between a man and a woman, right?
Yeah, Jesus said so.
Right, Jesus said so many times. Yeah. Oh wait,
he talked about that more than anything else, John.
Oh, that's right.
You're feeding the hungry, all that.
Yeah. We don't care about any of that. We don't care about any of that. We only care about what
John,
Jesus never said.
Jesus talked about marriage being between a man and a woman more than he talked about anything else. It's in the Bible. Just do your research, man.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just relating conversations I've had online with people who love to tell me to do my research. I'm like, you're out of your mind. But no, it is an interesting question, though, right? It's because, and I do love that we're sort of tying up the end of the show with this because that's fascinating, and it's only going to get more fascinating as the technology improves and as those artificial intelligences, those kinds of things get better. I can only imagine now the kinds of conversations that would happen. They wouldn't be good. Siri gets me lost on the way to the grocery store. I don't think she's going to help me out in there. But I'm just going to be like, I don't know where to go. Stop bossing me around. But,
super gendered response to Siri.
Of course, right? But can you imagine? I mean, even 20 years ago, though, so 20 years, not that long ago, the idea of asking my phone a question, of even having a phone I could ask a question to, it would have been very science fiction-y. And so the fact is that, more often than not, I can say, hey, hey, Siri, or whatever. I can talk to my Alexa in the room and get the weather update or get the, that's what's going to look like in 20 or 30 years. Hell, what's going to look like in 10 or 15 years? I don't know. So it does pose those very interesting ethical questions.
Doesn't it kind of break down to this when it comes to ethics? When we are looking at the future of technology, the future of all of this, is it harming humanity as a whole? or is it helping us become better in community? If you answer yes to like, even though it seems weird and odd to me, but I see where as a community, it's bringing us together. It's making us more open and more honest, and we are more willing to talk to each other. I don't see how that is bad. If it's something we have to continue to hide because we're embarrassed, we have shame and all that, that's a problem. But that's not a problem with us. That's a problem with the society that says that we aren't willing to talk about it, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's also a way in which, I want to expand community to like include nature and the earth, right? Because the way in which we're creating these technologies are radically interacting with how we think about climate change. So I don't want to separate that from about this. There's also a way in which, especially related to AI and robots, whether we embody them in like humanoid forms, which causes a different kind of reaction from us than, you're like round a little vacuum cleaner or your coffee machine. They like elicit a different affective response. I think the way in which we interact with these has as much effect on me in my moral formation as it does, so I don't care if the avatar on VR has an actual person behind it, or if the sex robot, because of how they're embodied, makes me think differently about females or males. I think the way I talk about it with my community is interacting with this thing is morally forming me, regardless of the moral standing of the avatar or the robot. And in that way, I think you're really right about, are we saying, how is this creating good community? Is this leading us to greater flourishing, right? Is this the here and not yet that we're trying to strive for? Or is this us just trying to escape the ethical responsibility related to that?
Ooh, okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Those are all, I don't have, all right. I hadn't thought about that. Look at you. That was a very pointed question. I like that question though, because if there is sort of this escapist sensibility to it that I can see, I think I can see making an argument that, okay, maybe on the whole, this is not necessarily beneficial. But then you really have to get into the ethical questions of why someone would gravitate towards something like that. And then and that just kind of breaks out of the mold of any kind of cookie cutter moralizing about something, right? Like this is just right and this is just wrong. Well, let's talk about the reasons why. Why might you gravitate towards this? If it is to escape genuine human relationships, this is probably not beneficial to you.
You could also, it's not a hard step to go into like ableist theology too, where it's like, okay, so we are creating a scenario where someone who physically has an inability to be a fully sexual being that they want to be, and AI has all of a sudden offered them an opportunity to be part of that humanity that they feel like they've always been left out of.
Oh,
so
okay. Is
that morally wrong to allow them to have this? So again, and it's a whole new world. And in studying this idea of ableist theology that is entered into my thinking, right? And so it has to become a question. How is that not potentially a positive for someone who's a quadriplegic or has other issues, within their, I don't want to use the word handicap because I don't like that word, but within their disabilities.
But what if there were even intimacy issues that were either mental health related or other developmental issues? Yeah, you're right. I hadn't even thought about from an ableist point of view. Wow, John.
There's actually great research on how like neurodivergent young men have interacted with female sex robots and gained a level of confidence in their ability to interact with the opposite sex. So we're thinking about like, there's all these cultural issues coming in on why and how you have to be a certain way. But your interaction with an AI can help empower you to feel differently about that. And maybe that actually helps you. I don't know. The jury's out from my perspective on whether the whole point of AI and robots and everything else is to make us better at human connection. I'm not sure. Maybe it's just better make us better humans. And maybe that means being better at human connection. I don't know. But yeah, there's good research that demonstrates that for someone who's neurodivergent, this kind of technology can really assist them.
Yeah. I mean, and even if that's not the stated intention, if that ends up being a possible byproduct of that, then by all means, right? And this is why ethics are so much more interesting than morality questions. I mean, unless they're morality questions that are bolstered by at least an understanding of ethics. I mean, because then you get into these places of something that on its face maybe seems obviously wrong or weird or whatever, and then you start to ask the questions like John asked, and you go, maybe in that case, maybe, and then you start to see that there are places where ethically it might be a very positive thing. That's interesting, man. Who knew we would have a conversation about the ethics of sex robots and their place within the neurodivergent and ableist community? Okay, good. John, there's your title for the podcast episode.
Now I got to write that down.
Talking sex robots. Let's talk about sex robots.
I got a couple other people to recommend for you to have on your show for that.
Oh, please do.
Yeah.
Seriously, John. So I don't know if you know this about us. We'll end it by saying this. We don't want to have the normal conversations. We don't want to have the easy conversations. I enjoy very much conversations that at times make me go, maybe stumble over my words because I'm not sure how to say what I want to say without sounding like a dumbass. So we've had people, the first conversation we had with somebody about purity culture, I feel like I stammered and stumbled my way through half that conversation because I'm saying out loud words I was told we weren't supposed to talk about in polite company. And so the nifty positive side effect of that is we get more comfortable talking about these things, and we don't feel like we have to whisper words like sex and and robot.
I think we got clitoris in the episode.
We did.
Let's give a shout out to that.
I just think it'd be funny to hear. Now I want to go on my phone later and ask Siri to pronounce it because I'm pretty sure she can't. I was driving through San Francisco one time getting directions, and Siri was pronouncing San Francisco. Turn left onto, towards San Francisco. And I was like, man, how would she pronounce other words? And now that word sort of just stuck me. It's like, there's no way she's going to say that one right. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we've been saying it wrong all this time. So I have to go back to that Seinfeld episode and when he couldn't remember the name of the girl he was dating. And her name was Dolores. Anyway, so she said it rhymes with the female body part, and he was yelling "Mulva."
At least he knew vulva, which most people don't know.
I give Jerry Seinfeld props for at least knowing that one. He's like, "No, it's not Mulva. Get the hell out of it." She's like, "It's Dolores." All right, I feel like I've ended on a very silly note. That's good.
That's good. Yes.
Kate, speaking for myself, I'm sure John would concur. Amazing. Yeah. I'm so glad we made this work.
Yeah.
I appreciate your patience in coming back and trying this again. You've been up since 3:00 this morning or 3:45. And so, we've kept you up past your bedtime, but thank you. Thank you for an important and amazing conversation. I hope we can get a chance to catch up with you a little further down the road and update some stuff.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. And this has been an amazing conversation. I've not felt tired one moment of it.
Well, good. I appreciate that. I haven't either. And I was exhausted, but now I'm all energized and I want to go do sex robot research and ask Siri how to say certain things. Okay. So, I'll report back, John. I'll let you know how that goes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.